Once, we followed in Coralon's steps, but we strayed from that path. For our whole existence, we pay penance for a single misstep. Is it just? Mayhap not. But when, however, is love ever just? Is loss and longing a matter for judges to decide? Well, in my experience, only the heart knows what the soul truly wants. Whew! Powerful stuff, Elias. Good lord. Good on you, Miss Laruil Moonflower, last queen of Evermeet. My word.
I'm glad I found that one. It's quite a nice reading.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, I felt like it was the only thing that did this this particular individual justice. Good on her. She clearly had a lot of stuff going on at some point.
Oh, yes.
Oh, hello, apprentices. Welcome to the Arcane Archive. So glad to have you back for this week's class. If you all are not already privy, me and Elias today saw fit that we would take you on a bit of a journey on a topic that is quite near and dear to our hearts.
Oh, definitely.
It is a topic that many of you might already know. It's about us. Well, not us specifically.
The elves.
The elves, indeed. But again, I can see some of you rolling your eyes, especially you. But that's fine. I understand all of you probably are rather knowledgeable and in-depth about the elves of our world. But we thought perhaps you'd be interested in hearing about ones from another. You see, in me and Elias's travels across the multiverse, we saw fit to visit one particular realm quite a while back and gather up quite a bit of information about the native denizen elves of that plane. These elves are from a realm known as the Forgotten Realms. And so today we think we'll take a bit of a deep dive with you into the lives and history of the elves of the Forgotten Realms. Long before elves existed, there was a deity by the name of Coralon Lorethian. A being of consummate mutability and infinite grace, Coralon was a god like no other, able to take the form of a chuckling stream, a teasing breeze, an incandescent beam. Well, Coralon's body could become whatever he pleased, whenever he wished, and when consorting with other gods, Coralon often adopted their appearances, male, female, or whatever else he chose at that time. But just as often kept their company in the form of rose blossom or delicate dough. Now, Coralon's flamboyant mercurial personality showed through no matter which form he took. Coralon loved wholeheartedly, broke oaths without reservation, and took pleasure from every encounter with the other divine beings of the multiverse. And most of the gods accepted Coralon's mutability and passionate behavior as impressive, beloved, even just fun little traits, indeed. However, there were many that were rather infuriated and aggravated and hated. One prominently of which was known as Grumsh, the greatest of the orc gods. Now, Grumsh's wrath was almost universally respected as well, even among the divine powers, but Coralon blithely took no heed of him. Perhaps it was this seeming haughtier-than-thou personality that enabled Grumsh to get close enough to wound Coralon, igniting the legendary conflict that cost Grumsh one of his eyes. But we can talk about that another time. Now, depending on who does the telling, this battle or clash of titans was fought across many planes and worlds for many years or time or very few seconds in total. However, regardless, the important part to remember here is from this battle, Coralon bled, and from his blood was born the first of the elves. And these were elves that were known as the Primal Elves.
Much akin to Coralon, not nearly as powerful, but just as changeable and audacious. They were fey creatures, and they traveled in Coralon's shadow, sparkling like reflections from a finely cut gem. And once he noticed these echoes of himself, he took them all to a realm known as Arvandor, and while enjoying their company, he came to appreciate their ideas, which were both familiar and novel to him, and singled out those that were special and had great repute, and gave each of them names.
Indeed, there was Airdrie, Keptolo, Solinar, Noralis, Erevan, Hanali, and many more, and with each name uttered, a new elf god was born.
One of these beings, although privileged to be elevated above the rest of the primal elves, was not satisfied with just being one of Corellon's trusted underlings. She, for she had declared herself thus, saw, in the multiverse around them, other beings making an impact in these various worlds. The entity who now called herself Lolth spoke to the other new gods and wove an enticing story about how the elves could attain superiority if only they could sacrifice a bit of their freedom. Together, united in this purpose, those gods could be the vanguard of this effort. Wasn't losing a little bit of freedom to achieve greatness worth the price?
Now, see, alright, let me just stop real quick here. Like, okay, on the one hand, right, I get this whole, like, Lolth envisioning this idea of, greatness, of being able to, especially if you see other people over there and they're like, oh, wow, they're doing some cool stuff over there. I'd be interested in maybe trying something like that. Maybe switching things up. It's cool to be all infinitely mutable and adaptable and whatever and such, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of structure and foundation to something if you really need to, I don't know, experience stuff.
Well, you can never change anything if you can't stay in the same state long enough to make it happen.
That's true. I guess, well, and on the other hand, I'm sure that this whole proposition of hers probably wasn't entirely altruistic in nature, to be fair.
Well, indeed it was not, actually. After persuading these entities to take these static forms, largely resembling what elves look like today, they turned away from Corellon's example of being wild and ever-shifting and never being in the same place or the same way. As those reflections of Corellon changed, their nature and defined themselves became static. They came to see Corellon and Lolth in a different way. They viewed Corellon as their father, the one who had sired them, and Lolth as their mother, the one who set them on their path. And, of course, as children do, they picked sides, favored one parent over the other.
Ugh, that's terrible. It's the worst.
It is. It's not very fun. But Corellon was, understandably, in my opinion, revolted by this betrayal, and rallied against Lolth's intrusion. Some of the elves rose to her defense. They argued that no entity who sprang from Corellon, no matter how rebellious, should be attacked.
See, now that also brings up another interesting implication. Apparently, they're now making the implication that he attacked Lolth. Now, I'm not sure if, they're meaning he literally, physically went to attack her, or if maybe he just, laid into her verbally and emotionally. I'm not saying either one is necessarily worse than the other per se. I mean, you can do some real scathing emotional assaults, let me tell you. I've been both on the receiving and on the giving end of those many a time myself. But I will say, I feel like there is a bit of a stark difference in, hey, I'm angry, I'm kind of venting out my feelings on this thing that I'm not agreeing with and she kind of sprung on me, as opposed to hey,
I'm going to kill you.
I'm going to kill you now.
Yes. Well, those who remained advocates of Corellon insisted that their father also wanted greatness for the elves, and that such greatness could be achieved if all the primal elves followed his lead. And as such, with children, they now gathered around both Lolth and Corellon as each entity pleaded its case.
Bit of a debate off. I do like me one of those.
We do like debate here. But as that happened, Corellon became distracted, lost, so to say.
In thought.
Yeah. And Corellon crept up on him and sought to strike a mortal blow.
Yes.
Now we do know that is what we found. And that's a whole different issue. killing someone over a disagreement.
Yes, Lolth did indeed seem rather nefarious in her purposes in trying to creep up on him and kill him like that. Like that, I feel like that doesn't leave much to the imagination. That seems like pretty obvious. Like, yeah, she tried to kill him. She tried to walk up and just, I don't know, cut his head off or something like that. I don't know how you would deliver a mortal blow to a being who apparently can just change their shape at will or whatever. But either way, it definitely seems that the elves who favored Corlon helped to blunt the attack from our accounts.
Yes.
But those in Lulf's camp remained aloof and detached, doing next to nothing to prevent her onslaught, so they were just cool to let that shit happen.
Well, they were different enough at that point.
That seems weird and unfortunate. Alright then, well, I guess it comes to no surprise to anyone that this act rent the elves asunder. Lulth and Corlon parting ways, Lulth to become a demon lord in the abyss. Man, she really had a dream and went all for it. And Corlon to become the de facto leader of a pantheon that could no longer be trusted. I mean, they literally just dove in front of like an arcane bolt for this guy, and he doesn't trust them anymore? That seems weird.
Well, it's the pantheon split.
I guess.
The original one, that would probably be why.
I don't know. See, that's the thing. Like, I'm a subscriber to the notion of like, hey, a little bit of paranoia is healthy. It does everybody good. But having too much, or even laying the blame of a particular situation at one person or one group even's feet, is, my opinion, just blatant pettiness, or just, yeah, pettiness, laziness. It's like, you are clearly not settling this out for what it actually means and matters. Like, that's, I don't know, I have a bit of a problem with that. But either way, at that point, the elf gods who sided with Corlon became the Seldarine, and those who fled along with Lulth became the Seldarine's dark reflection, or known as the Dark Seldarine. Very creative. Now, save for those who had been named gods, Corlon cast out the rest of the primal elves from Arvandor and consigned them to a physical existence, a prison of the flesh, if you will, on the material plane and other worlds of the multiverse, such as the Feywild and the Shadowfell. From then on, all elves would be mortal, fixed in the forms they had adopted in defiance of Corlon's will. And the elves who most revered Lulth became drow, while the others divided themselves into a multitude of surface-dwelling groups, each worshipping some or all of the Seldarine in their respective enclaves. And as a consequence of this rift, no elf would ever be the same. None would ever fully be able to return to Corlon's embrace to enjoy life eternal in Arvandor. Instead, when an elven soul returns to Arvandor in their time of passing, it is adopted by the other gods of the Seldarine and given respite from the world for a time, during which it is left alone to contemplate its creator's disappointment. Good lord. Now, if that ain't like the most like apt description of like cosmic go sit in the corner and think about what you
sit on the stairs
literally
you understand.
And, yeah, like that's fucking ridiculous. Good lord. Like, this guy is petty with a capital Petty.
Well, they chose them.
Well, I mean, they didn't. Technically, they came from him.
Yes,
and that's,
true.
you know, yeah, there's a bit of that whole sire allegiance, I would assume, but either way, not like our god, for instance. Our god he is incredibly benevolent, perfect, incredible. I mean, all the things he's done are amazing. Like, that is a person that you want to really strive to, like, set examples for, to really be able to embody his ideals and beliefs. God, I love that guy.
Well, except for that one time?
No, that wasn't his fault. We all know that. He was fine.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah, no, we all knew that he was cool. That was hers. That was her problem, not ours.
Okay.
Not his.
Well, speaking of them being sent down to the material planes and the ones around them, before that technically happened, the elves cavorted on various planes, before that rift. And outside the glory of Arvandor, their favorite place was the Feywild, or the Fairy. A realm of unbridled passion.
Ah, much like ours.
There you go. It is to that place of splendors that the elves fled after they were flung from Corlon's presence. It is in that place where they transformed from fey creatures into humanoids. Afterward, they often wept, as they realized what they had lost, their sorrow made even deeper by the influence of the Feywild. Now, I know that quite well.
That dag-nabbit Feywild always messing with your emotions.
Well, mine. You seemed pretty much okay.
I mean, no, it has an effect on everyone long enough you stay. I mean, it gets under your skin, you don't necessarily realize it, but for me, I felt right as rain. I felt home among home there for myself, It felt nice not being able to necessarily have to think about all of the potential repercussions or ramifications of my thoughts being said without really thinking about them and thinking how they would react to people around me, It was very freeing for me, and I appreciated that. And that, in essence, I suppose is the word to best sum up the Feywild. Freedom.
I guess it was freeing for me in its own way.
Yeah, I think you did. You cried like a storm. Like, good lord, I didn't realize there was that much moisture in your body until it finally came pouring out of your eye sockets.
I felt quite dry by the end of it, yeah.
And spent. I mean, it seemed like you came to a bit of a revelation, It was good.
Yeah.
Spent a bit of time with that water nymph. I think you two really hit it off well.
Well, don't, Jesus.
What?
Don't say that. Never mind.
I thought Ariel was very nice.
Moving on.
Okay, fair enough.
There was also the place where they discovered their potential joys of being a person in a world of fixed forms.
Sex. We're talking about sex.
Maybe.
No, it's definitely sex.
But after a time, most of the elves eventually spread from the Feywild to the other worlds, as wanderlust and curiosity drove them to the far reaches of the multiverse. In those other worlds, the elves developed the forms of culture and society that are now associated with their people. In some places, the name of Corellon has passed from the memory of the elves, but the god's blood flows within them all, even if they do not know of its source. And these are the people that we met.
This is true.
Traveling.
There were quite the wide, diverse cast of them, for sure. I mean, after all, look, even from what we found there, no matter where they seem to be in the multiverse, elves of all sorts feel still a special connection to the realm of fairy, for it was their race's first home before they were cast adrift. And even if they can't name that realm, or don't know how to return there themselves, vestigial memories of the place still sometimes glimmer in their minds when they trance. Visions and meditation. Dope. Now, one group of elves, known as the Eladrin, which you all also might know, we have some of those here too, never left that first refuge. After being exposed to the pervasive magic of the Feywild for centuries, these elves have a supernatural quality not shared by their cousins on the material plane. Some Eladrin have been transformed so thoroughly that they have become Fey creatures once again, and have been permitted to return to Arvandor even, where they are a fascination and a delight to the Seldarine. Bully for them. Hey, if they wanted to maintain their roots and be as close to their ancestral primal elves as possible, I guess they accomplished that. Well done.
Yeah. Now they get to live as, well, entertainment.
Fey, yes. Like I said, hey, whatever gets your rocks off, No kink same, no kink shame. That's all.
Wow.
Like I said, to each their own is essentially what I am saying, you know what I mean? But either way, for those elves who ventured out from the Feywilds to explore parts untold. Now, it is no secret, of course, that we elves, and wherever we are from, are skilled in both magic and warfare. However, the Tel Kassia, or the people, as they call themselves in Faerun, built vast and powerful empires long before any of the humans came to power there. Now, the days of the great elven nations are long past, and many elves have withdrawn from the world into isolation in sylvan realms or set sail across the trackless sea to an apparent place known as the Isle of Evermeet. Well, unlike dwarves, who develop subraces in the world, elves brought their divisions with them, settling into separate kingdoms by type. Beings of immense power, the first elves explored and settled the world, bringing about a golden age of art, magic, and civilization, as obviously, yes, this is just kind of expected. However, at the height of their power, the elves performed a high magic ritual intended to create the ideal homeland. And they succeeded. However, the spell seemed to have sundered the land in a terrible cataclysm at the same time that it caused the distant isle of Elven to rise from beneath the sea. So, you know, I suppose, if nothing else, this is a good example of you can't make a piece of heaven on earth without cracking the planet a little bit.
And that doesn't even come to compare to, well, what happened after that. Yes, the Crown Wars. Well, it's a series of conflicts between all the old great elven kingdoms, lasting 3 or 4 of our lifetimes? 3,000 years?
About 3,000 years, last I checked, yeah. And these battles devastated much of the world and resulted in the Dark Elves' official exile and flight into the Underdark.
But also caused the remaining elven empires to go into a long, slow decline, and many of their kind actually taking part in the Great Retreat to their refuge on the Evermeet. As elves increasingly withdrew from the world, other races and civilizations rose to prominence in Faerun, which is where we currently find ourselves.
Indeed, yes. Most of the individuals that we were able to interact with in the Forgotten Realms are indeed primarily based on the continent of Faerun. But overall, honestly, it was quite incredible to hear and to learn about our elven cousins from across the cosmos, you know? From what I was able to glean, the elves branched away from the Eladrin quite a while before they had established their empire. And no one is exactly sure which race came first, to be honest, though most believe the Eladrin did. But I digress. Either way, of the Tel'Kasir, or the people, those who would become the elves, formerly, were the first to arrive on the then united words of Abir Torel, which I believe is the planet. There was named.
It is.
And at that time, they were only known as the Green Elves, as well as maybe a couple of lesser other sub-races too. But in their language, they were known as Sea Tel'Kasir. Now, millennia passed while the Fey ancestors of the Elves and Eladrin began to establish and together rule over much of Toril in their empires in relative peace, until around maybe 12,000 DR or so, when the Sun Elf nation of Arya Vandar invaded the Dark Elf and Green Elf nation of Mieritar, starting the first of the 5 Crown Wars.
Oh, and they suffered many defeats in those wars.
The Green Elves did, yes.
And by the end of the conflict had lost all of their former territory. Driven into the wilderness, the Green Elves gradually changed over generations, with the gap between them and the High Elves widening until they became a distinct race. This change caused the Elves to gradually lose their talent for the arcane and grow even closer in their connections to the wilderness, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the wild beasts with whom they shared it. The Green Elves who remained in isolation became the Wild Elves, and lost their taste for civilization and nation building, becoming nomadic wanderers.
Now, see, that does bring up one particular interaction we had with the individuals who eventually became known as the Wild Elves. I still don't understand what the goddamn issue was. I mean, for one, it took us approximately 3 weeks to find the particular tribe that was in the area where we actually could even find a trace of them to begin with. And then upon arriving at their little establishment, or their little, whatever you want to call it, their makeshift kind of village, they were incredibly rude. I would even say just downright unsociable.
Well, you did, I think, strike a nerve with them.
How so? I see I did nothing wrong. We walked up, we introduced ourselves, a perfectly cordial expectation of anyone. We let them know that we were fellow elven travelers and adventurers from across the cosmos of reality and time, and we wanted to invite them to join in their culture and their history, to bring it on and to join the rest that will be part of the most vast, large encompassing of knowledge, information in the infinite cosmos of reality. And what did they do?
Oh, they shot at us.
Yeah, they shot an arrow. They rained arrows down upon us.
Yes. Well,
literally.
That might have something to do with you just not letting go of the fact that you really wanted to teach them the sword?
That is my thing.
Yes.
I'm a literal mage knight. That is what I do. I felt...
Your phrasing?
What? Oh, my phrasing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a miscommunication.
What could possibly be miscommunicated about me wanting to teach them how to play with my sword? How is that hard to understand in any way, shape, or form? I literally walked up to them. I was very nice. I was like, hi, we have a lot of different culture and things of us. We could teach you all kinds of magic, both arcane, maybe natural, maybe even talk about some divine magic. Oh, I also have skills with a sword. If you wanted to learn how to defend yourself with weaponry like this, I could teach you how to play with my sword.
Yes.
I could teach your women how to play with my sword.
Yes.
I could teach your children how to play with my sword. Like, what could possibly be weird or strange about that in any way, shape, or form?
All I know was that they didn't immediately try to kill us until after you said that specific part. So...
Well, clearly, they have some weird, strange things about sword stances and forms and tactics.
I'm sure.
I'm incredibly adept with wielding my sword,
Yes.
Elias.
I know you are.
I've been told many a time I wield it like no other.
Okay, well, unfortunately...
It's very curvy and long.
It made it very difficult for us to interact with these people. And after sending Alastor as far away as I could, with the help of his familiar,
Yes.
I monitored what are now called the Wild Elves for a time, and even was able to glean some information from them.
True. But I mean, at the end of the day, most of the information we got on the Wild Elves, ironically, came from the Wood Elves.
Yes.
And our time spent with them.
Yes, but the stories that they told were quite interesting.
True.
And helpful to kind of get a timeline for everything that happened. The Green Elves, when they first arrived, were scouts, so to speak,
Yes.
along with
The
some
Lithari.
lesser known.
Yeah.
You know,
The Lithari and the Avariels, I believe.
they were explorers, scouts, but the Green Elves were by far the most successful at establishing themselves and exploring new areas on the material plane, eventually creating several territories, and by the time this happened, nations. Unfortunately, all of these nations were destroyed by the Crown Wars, and the leftover elves never created anything after that. They entered into a time period that they referred to as the Wandering, moving from land to land over a period of many generations. It was during this time that the Green Elves separated further from their elven roots, becoming a distinct subrace.
Alright.
Forced to live as fugitives, slaves, and vagabonds.
Okay,
as we saw, yes.
It's not great. That explains maybe a little bit more of the behavior.
Yes. They eventually withdrew into the deepest forests and mountains of Faerun. They did not participate in the retreat to Evermeet that a lot of the other elves did, instead using isolation as a survival technique, hence why it took us so long to find them.
Yes.
But, unfortunately, forsaking many of their traditional elven skills of high magic, and losing their touch with ancient traditions and regressing more into this primitive state, they, did learn a lot and are much more akin to surviving in the wild. But at that point is when we now learned of what they're called, which is now Wild Elves.
Yeah, okay, I get it. They've had a pretty shit time for a while now. Like, all the civilizations that they tried to make kind of got destroyed by other elves. They were forced into acts of slavery, fugitivism, if not other outright, vagabondism and the like. I get it, that would probably make anybody pretty cranky, pretty bitter, as my friends say, bitter.
Yeah,
I'm trying to bring that one back. You like that?
Can we not?
Bitter.
No.
Instead of bitter, bitter.
I like the T's though.
But I like this the It gives a hit. Bitter, Well,
speaking of new friends of ours.
indeed. No, it is as we stated. We learned, ironically, most of this not from the Wild Elves themselves, but from our time spent among the Wood Elf communities. And those, I love the Wood Elves. I don't know if you know, actually, but my mother is a Wood Elf. I'm actually technically half-breed. I'm half High Elf, half Wood Elf. But they gave me very, very fond memories and reminders of my time with my mother and the Wood Elf communities that I've been across, and they're definitely one of my favorites, I would say.
Well...
oh, absolutely, I would love to. Wood Elves are also known as Copper Elves, or Sea Telkesir, in Faerun, specifically. Wood Elves are also the most common elves remaining there. Their ancestors left behind the strife of the Crown Wars millennia ago to found strongholds and settlements deep in the forest for protection. Now today, most Wood Elves stand guard over the ruins of the past, of their long shattered and torn down kingdoms and empires, believing it their duty to preserve their fallen glory as an object lesson of the dangers of hubris. Love that. That is important. Class, never forget. Alright? Never forget the past and all your experiences, for they say that those who forget are doomed to repeat it.
Well, the Wood Elves have learned that very well.
They have, and they have taken that particular lesson to heart, and I respect that 100%. Now, Wood Elves tend to be hardier than other elves, more solid and grounded than their cousins. This attitude is reflected in their culture and traditions, Wood Elves being more toward physical pursuits than most others. And again, they also view their ancient elven history with a far more critical eye, believing that the so-called great, and yes, this is quotation marks here, elven kingdoms were responsible for many equally great mistakes. Always important, never let yourself, your mind, get too clouded with your pride or ego. It blinds you to the truth. Now, they look upon what is known as the Sundering, and that, my dear students, that was the event where the elves began to cast a high magic spell in order to essentially break off a piece of Arvandor, if I recall correctly.
And bring it.
And bring it into the material realm for them, seeing as they were, starving so much for their daddy deity's affection and, warmth, even his presence, that they were like, screw it, we'll go ahead and just
bring it here?
Transcend realities and bring it here. Which, in one instance, I must admit I am very impressed with. I mean, the actual amount of arcane power and knowledge that they would have had to have amassed and be able to cast at that time is absolutely incredible. It's astounding what they're able to accomplish. However,
they did try, it almost destroyed the world.
It cracked a large portion of the planet, sure. But as we said, sometimes in the pursuit of knowledge and the truth, you gotta maybe crack a few planets or two. Maybe. I don't know. Sometimes. I haven't done it yet. But I personally do not judge a person for doing their best in a particular field of knowledge and interest. Regardless, back onto topic. Now, they look upon the Sundering, the Crown Wars, and the descent of the Drow, all these calamities, being the result of the acts of arrogance on the part of their ancestors. Living around and amid the reminders of this arrogance, and standing witness to the rise and fall of many an elven empire, Wood Elves see the place of the elves in the world differently than either moon or sun elves do. Wood Elves seek a quiet harmony with the world, not the domination of it.
Which is interesting, because as we have found out, the Wood Elves in this realm were a little bit of a mix, so to speak, of the original Green Elves and the
High Elves.
Yes, the High Elves as well. And now they are considered a Sylvan counterpart of those High Elves. They don't like really living in cities or strongholds, and favor living close to nature.
It's true.
Wood Elves have not claimed a large realm of their own since the kingdom of Erlen was destroyed millennia ago. Instead, they maintain a number of smaller settlements, the better to keep those communities hidden or protected. They claim territory in great forests all over, the High Forest, the Great Dale, the Western Heartlands, and even more. Some Wood Elves live in other elven communities and territories where they serve as scouts, rangers, huntsmen, pretty much anything that has to do with the forests.
True.
Despite seeing themselves as part of the world, Wood Elves don't commonly emerge from their homes to encounter non-elves. Likewise, in the deep woods and forests of the world, most Wood Elves don't come across members of other races. Unless They do the work of adventurers, diplomats, couriers, and the like, who pursue similar, trying to find other places and people.
Requires a little bit more of a social aspect to the job.
And luckily, us being elves, they found us pretty quickly.
Well, we were also actively searching for them. Again, us tracking through that forest for days at a time. Same thing. All kinds of nasty beasties constantly, snapping at our heels. I believe you got stuck in a bog at one point that just kind of randomly seemed to apparate into existence out of nowhere. It had a very kind of Feywild-esque vibe and feel to it, I'll be honest. It was interesting. Fun times, but also stank a lot.
Yes, no, it was not pleasant. Although once we saw their actual...
Oh no, their abode was absolutely astounding. I mean, again, it reminds me of a lot of my home wood elf communities that I've lived in for quite a while. I mean, you have not seen a treehouse until you've seen a wood elf treehouse.
I can concur.
Marvels of the world, let me tell you. One of the marvels of any world, that is. Speaking of which, despite seeing themselves as part of the world, wood elves don't commonly emerge from their homes, as we just said. In Faerun, they usually tend to keep to themselves, but they're still relatively more sociable than most elves. Even if they are reclusive, they still put out a helping hand to any that they can.
Yes, you will encounter them in other areas of Faerun as well.
Either way, regardless, they are skilled naturalists. Wood elves often take up professions that allow them to remain close to the wild, or at the very least to make use of their knowledge of woodcraft, wildlife, and forestry. Wood elves are far more capable in warfare and particularly archery than many give them credit for. They are less magically inclined than their cousins, to be sure. However, they still have their fair share of practitioners of the art of the arcane, as well as clerics and many druids. However, I will say, they definitely can't hold a candle, at least in the arcane aspect, to their said cousins, the high elves. These, of course, are the elves that embody the arcane magic in their very essence, as it were. Being called, there are two subsets of high elves that we were able to ascertain. Although I think there's technically a third, but they are much more obscure. We weren't able to learn much about them because they apparently hide out in their own demi-plane that they've made.
Yes, and we weren't going to just go rushing into something like that.
I mean, I definitely would have. Unfortunately, I was not able to obtain any of the teleportation sickle sequences, as well as any other means of
finding it?
Breaching
yes.
the demi-plane. Regardless.
We definitely had a social favorite of the next two.
Oh yes, very much so. We had quite a number of lovely encounters with this particular sub-race.
The Moon Elves.
Moon Elves, also known as the Silver Elves or the TTRPG. Moon Elves are known to be far more tolerant and adventurous than any of the other elves, let me tell you. And in ancient times, the dissolution of their empires dispersed Moon Elves among other races, many of them, and since then they have traditionally gotten along well with their non-elf neighbors. Well, kind of as a matter of, survival and principle.
You have to.
You kind of have to.
It just makes sense.
I would hope so. Otherwise, what the fuck are you doing? Anywho, they mingle with other people while their kin remain in hidden settlements and secluded strongholds. Moon Elves are sometimes seen as rather frivolous and maybe a little bit irresponsible compared to other elves, and by other elves for that matter. However, it is this easygoing, fluid nature of their culture, philosophy, and personalities that has enabled them to survive and flourish wherever they are during and after tragic times in Elven history. Now, while communities of Moon Elves can be found in mainland Faerun, many Moon Elves live in the settlements of other races, staying for a few seasons or maybe even several decades before moving on, which, comparatively for us, is relatively short.
Relatively short. But those who stay in the settlements of other races were how we made our way.
It's true.
To the only Moon Elf settlement we could find.
It was good, and we were very lucky and fortunate to be able to run into one, and they were kind enough to offer us a bit of a guide to take them back there. And it was one hell of a party when we got there, let me tell you. And I remember that one night where we went in Targasis. We had a lovely drink with him in their tavern. The music was playing, the beer and mead was flowing. I'll never forget the quote that he told us, and I love it. I feel like this sums up not necessarily even just Moon Elf tendencies and beliefs and feelings, but I feel like in essence it does come from the core of all elves. And he said, and I quote, "To a moon elf, home can be among the members of one's family, among one's clan, or even among others' friends and loved ones. It does not matter where you're from, where you're going, where you are. Home is wherever the heart is."
It was a nice phrase.
Words to live by, in my opinion. I appreciated that. He also went in to say that moon elves, who typically usually take up settlement or residence near maybe a place of sun elves, they're not particularly shy about expressing the opinion that their sun elf kin need to be less serious and, egotistical. Conversely, in turn, the sun elves pretend to be far more annoyed by their moon elf neighbors than perhaps they truly are. At least from what I've gleaned. It seems to be like there's a bit of a tsundere kind of dynamic going on here with them. Like the sun elves are sitting there going like, "Ah, you moon elf, little irresponsible bastards, get a job, you need to cut your hair, or show some responsibility for once."
It's a disappointed father.
A little bit, or maybe an expectant older brother who's taking on more responsibility and wants to get their younger brother and whip him into shape. Meanwhile, again, the moon elves are like, "Oh, come on, man, relax. We're all chill here. You need to just come on, have a pint. You can relax, man. You need to really loosen up them pants of yours, man. You need to let your balls breathe a little bit. It's just It's a fun little dynamic. It's nice to see that despite the fact that they might have outwardly, on the surface, maybe a bit of a, rivalry, or maybe even a disappointment, or just, what's the word? Not disregard, but they do not agree or appreciate it. Inside, they really do still love and care for one another.
Oh, definitely.
As brethren and kinsmen.
And speaking of those kin, we did end up talking to some sun elves, or known as gold elves, or Artelkasir, which have quite a reputation, for being arrogant, self-important bastards.
And that's putting it lightly.
Definitely.
Many of them seem to believe that they are Corellon's chosen people, and that other races, even other elves, are subordinate to them, in both skill, significance, and sophistication. Are you shitting me? I don't even think even the haughtiest, mightiest, skillfuliest of anyone would possibly think that. That's just good lord. The amount of air in these people's heads is unfathomable. You'd think that they have a portal to the elemental plane of air in there. Good lord.
But they readily claim the title of High Elves with pride, and indeed their race is responsible for great and sometimes terrible achievements. I'd argue, mostly terrible.
Probably. Again, that whole, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't say mostly, but I feel like the terrible parts are just more prominent than the good. The whole cracking the planet thing. It's again, you brought a piece of heaven to earth, good for you, that's nice.
They also started the Crown Wars.
Yeah, they also did start the Crown Wars, from what we can tell. The nation of Arivandar was a Sun Elf nation, specifically. That was...
That's an achievement, I guess.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
But it was difficult. Combing through their histories, a lot of these stories are told from the idea that elves are better than everyone else.
Yeah,
specifically them.
I believe that they refer to it as the principle of elven excellence. And that no matter how interesting, exceptional, heroic, or noteworthy anyone else's accomplishments are, it will never, ever be better than elven accomplishments. They are inherently inferior to all things elven. Now, this attitude, rightly so, colors Sun Elves' relations with other elves, as well as other races in general. However, the Sun Elves seem to see other elves as diluted or diminished representation of elven culture. Some Sun Elves, however, to be fair,
we did meet a couple,
reject this way of thinking. There are exceptions to every rule, and and thank Coralon for it. See what I did there? See what I did there?
That's good.
Well, although then again, I wonder if Coralon actually is the one responsible for that or not. Maybe the Sun Elves are like Coralon's worst portion, so maybe he's actually the one who's at fault for the way the Sun Elves act most of the time. You know,
we haven't talked to him.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Assumptions, you know what they say about assumption, makes an ass out of you and me. Either way, some Sun Elves reject this way of thinking, but it is common enough that when most folk of Faerun see a Sun Elf, all they see is arrogance and maybe even narcissism personified. Which again, fair, but also, you don't know that person. It's definitely unfair to brand one individual with the title of, you know, the vast of his community or his race, so to speak. Regardless, it is also true. Once we left the Sun Elves community and all of the other people that we asked about the Sun Elves, that we asked for their opinions, their thoughts, they all, without fail, did say how haughty, arrogant, narcissistic, pompous, asshole douches they can be. And yet, even with all of that, all of them, without fail, agreed 100% that they are indeed a paragon of tireless compassion and thoughtful champions of good for the realm. So I guess,
So not all bad.
yeah, so I guess in the end it's kind of like I said earlier, like maybe like
It's
a big brother role. I feel like the Sun Elves are literally the big brothers of like the elves in this way, that they're kind of asshole, arrogant, pompous douchebags who give you noogies, maybe like, you know, a wet willy, purple, maybe, you know, even a wedgie or two.
But when someone else tries to do
But when you get bullied by somebody else, they show up and they're ready to throw down harder than anyone else. Family's family at the end of the day.
Now, I will say, probably me and Alastor's favorite part of the Sun Elf civilization we got to see was the magic.
I must admit, their strides, their progress in the arcane arts was astounding.
Yes. More than any other elf societies we saw, they had more accomplished wizards, sages, and arcane crafters than any other group we went to.
It's true. I mean, their progress and their ability to combine not just arcane, but even with the natural essence of their environment was peerless.
Because not all of them are skilled magic users, but
true.
Every Sun Elf we met was magical, somewhat.
Yes.
I mean, it was a lot.
They are intrinsically tied to magic itself, as are all elves, to be fair. But there is a little bit something about high elves, even Sun Elves maybe specifically, that provided them with a particular innate ability and talent for it, most of the time. And that, again, is something I can respect. Magic in all of its forms are neither good nor evil. It is simply the expanding of one's awareness and knowledge of the world and its processes and how it works and how to better utilize them for your designs. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, I can appreciate and respect that the Sun Elves definitely seem to have had a rather deep grasp of the arcane arts.
So much so that they can take it a step further. They mix magic with other art forms, producing the complex dance of the Blade Singers, which I believe you're familiar with.
I am very familiar with them. I had a particular interest. I'm a mage knight myself, and it seemed that there is quite a bit of correlation between my arts that I utilize and these Blade Singers as well. I learned quite a bit being able to spar with them. It was a hell of a time. I mean, that, as well as the fact they also have the ability to use enchanting music of their bards, and even mix it with the meticulous craftwork of their artisans. They are not necessarily up to the same snuff as Dwarven or even Gnomish makes.
But magic.
But Elven craftswork with their magic ability is peerless, undisputed. Now, Sun Elf adventurers often bring a feeling of noblesse oblige by their recollections to any profession they are a part of. When they venture out into the world, they do so to find challenge, to find its dangers, and to face and overcome all of its adversities, because someone must. And who better to do so than them?
So they're good at what they do, though.
They are very good at what they do.
Very good.
I mean, we're elves. They're elves. It's only expected. But again, they just aren't to be so
It's just an
dickish
attitude.
about
It's just an attitude.
Just been a dickwipe right now, man. What the hell? Why are you being such a dickwipe? Yeah, you're good at what you do. I respect it. I'm good at what I... Why is what I do less than what you do, necessarily?
Yeah. I think everyone there knows that they do a good job.
I mean, it's true. And so it's also why it's so hard and why it's so frustrating at times. Because it's like, yeah, we get it. But still, calm down. Well... Oh. Well, look at the time. My word. Well, thank you, apprentices, for your time here. It seems that this is all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us at this class on the Arcane Archive on a deep dive into the Elves of the Forgotten Realms. Be sure to please leave a comment. We have a comment sheet here. We also have a little like tab here, like or dislike. You don't have to worry about the dislike, though. Obviously, it's impossible that you dislike this class here. But again, we have it right here for you. Please feel free to fill these out for us. It would help us to figure out what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right, and make things better overall. But once more, thank you all so much for attending class. We hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Be sure to always expand your minds, apprentices. And remember, Arcane Archive is here for you. Thank you so much. Farewell for now.